Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on when you're watching this. Today we're going to be talking about the Illinois government, and this video has some of the introductory information about the Illinois Constitution, and we'll go over the legislative branch. This is video 1 of 4, and I'm going to try and keep these as short as possible. So first, let's introduce the Illinois Constitution. A little historical background about our current Constitution. It was written all the way back in 1970. So 70, 80, 90, 2000, 2010. This thing is more than 50 years old, and we are still using it because nobody's called for a change to it. Previously, we have had 3 others. This is our 4th Constitution in Illinois. The last one actually lasted for about 100 years. So we're only about halfway through the length of the longest lasting Constitution, which was written in 1870. The first Constitution went into effect on December 3rd, 1818, when Illinois became the 21st state in the Union. And then this one was revised because it created a weak governor with no veto power. So we wanted the governor to have a little bit more power than that. And so we have, for the last 50 plus years, been using the 1970 Constitution. So let's talk about that Constitution, the 1970 Illinois Constitution. Some highlights. In our preamble, it states that the government has to protect people's health and work to fight poverty and fight inequality. We have a Bill of Rights in the 1970 Constitution. This guarantees things like women get equal protection of the laws. It outlaws discrimination based on disability, and so on and so forth. We'll talk more in detail about that later on. It's got information on suffrage and elections. Laws have to be general and uniform when it comes to election law, and there's actually a bipartisan board of elections that have to approve everything when it comes to election law. The legislative branch of Illinois is required to convene every year, so they must get together and work every year. And then it talks about rules of filling vacancies. As far as the executive branch, the governor and lieutenant governor now run as a team. And as of the 1970 Constitution, we have the position of comptroller, which we'll talk about later. The judicial branch, interestingly enough, is not appointed. It is elected in Illinois. All Illinois level, state level election, state level judges are decided through election. And then local government, this Constitution created what's called home rule, which gives some localities like counties or like cities, anything except for school districts, so local units of government. It gives them more authority to exercise power within their area. And then there's some new stuff on education, where all persons must be educated to the limit of their capacities, and the state has to help carry this out. So state-funded education, basically, is what that means. So let's kind of dive into the actual document. We're going to go through the first few articles through the legislative branch, and we'll end there. So the first article is the Bill of Rights. So it is at the beginning of the document. In Illinois, we thought it was so important to list the rights of Illinois citizens before anything else. So a little bit of a different way of thinking from 1787 to 1818, when Illinois finally became a state. Each right is a section, since they aren't amendments that needed to be added. This is a difference between the Bill of Rights in the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights in the Illinois Constitution. So instead of, Amendment 1, Amendment 2, it's Section 1, Section 2, and so on and so forth. So let's dig into a few of the similar rights that Illinoisans have here in the state, as well as all people in the United States. So we do have a due process clause that is in Section 2 of the Bill of Rights. So everyone in Illinois is entitled to due process of the law and equal protection under the laws. We also have reinforced the freedom of speech, religion, and assembly. That's in Sections 3, 4, and 5 of our Bill of Rights. We also have freedom from self-incrimination and from double jeopardy. So that's in Section 10 of the Illinois Bill of Rights. We have the right to a trial by jury. That's in Section 13 of the Bill of Rights. We also have upheld that you should not be forced to quarter soldiers in your private residence. That is in Section 21 of our Bill of Rights. We have a right to bear arms in Illinois. That comes from Section 22. There are others, but those are just some notable ones. And then let's talk about what's different between our Bill of Rights and the U.S. Bill of Rights. Now, remember, you can't directly go against the federal government, but you'll find that these sort of just add to the rights that are given to us by the federal government. Remember, the federal Constitution is very vague, so we added to it through our state governments. We have anti-discrimination rights in the Illinois Constitution. Now, keep in mind, this was written in 1970, so the language of the document is a little outdated. These are not my words. These are the words of the actual Illinois Constitution. So I wouldn't personally say them this way. However, this is the way that they are worded in the document, and I wanted to make sure you get it from the horse's mouth, so to speak. You cannot discriminate in employment or in the sale or rental of property. That is from Section 17 of the Bill of Rights. You cannot discriminate on the basis of sex. That is in Section 18 of the Bill of Rights. It's really interesting that this is not in the U.S. Constitution yet, but again, just never was approved by 3/4 of the states. You cannot discriminate against the handicapped. That is in Section 19 of the Bill of Rights. We also have people's individual dignity preserved. So any communications that portray criminality or depravity or that incite violence, hatred, abuse, hostility towards any person, any group of people, this language is condemned, according to Section or Article 1 of the Constitution. Now, what does condemned mean? Does that mean the government can take legal action against any communications that portray or incite hostility towards someone? It doesn't say. It just says that this kind of communication is condemned. So take that however you think it should mean. All right, Article 2 is real short. All Article 2 does is it lays out the separation of powers. Just like at the federal level, in Illinois, we have a legislative branch, an executive branch, and a judicial branch. And the second part of Article 2 says that the powers of the three branches of government extend beyond what's just listed in the Constitution. They can give themselves more powers. So that's kind of like the Illinois version of the necessary and proper clause, if you will. Moving on to Article 3. Article 3 talks all about suffrage and elections. So the Illinois Constitution lays out that you must be 18 to vote. This is exactly the same as the federal voting age. So we didn't change that. Elections have to be free and equal. You have to have lived in Illinois for 30 days prior to any given election day in order to vote in that election. And no county in Illinois can make the residency requirement longer. So they can't require you to have lived in Illinois for, say, 40 days. They can't say you have to lived there for a year. What they can do is they can shorten it. They can say you only have to have lived here for 2 weeks in order to vote in the election. You're fine. So that's the only caveat there is the county can shorten the residency requirement. They can't lengthen it. They can also make it longer for presidential elections. So in order to vote for the position of United States president, counties can say, no, you have to have lived in Illinois for 60 days. So that's the only caveat to that provision here in Article 3. You cannot vote if you are a convicted felon. And this section of the Constitution also lays out what would have to happen to recall the governor. Essentially, it would be by a petition that would call for a recall election. Article 3 also outlaws any kind of voter discrimination. So you cannot discriminate the right to vote based on anything. The only people who are not allowed to vote is those who are under 18 and convicted felons in the state of Illinois. Also, interestingly enough, here in Illinois, you can vote in a primary if you are 17 years old. So every single person in this class actually has the right to vote. So everybody should be registering to vote. As long as you'll be 18 by the time that the general election rolls around, Illinois law provides that you can vote in the primary. All right, now let's get into the branches of government. I'm going to give you an overview of what the Constitution says about the legislative branch, and that's where we'll wrap it up today. That is Article 4. Article 4 is the legislature. So the name of the legislative branch in Illinois is the General Assembly. That's different from the federal government. The federal government calls it the Congress. In Illinois, it's called the General Assembly. So anytime I'm talking about the General Assembly going forward in these lectures, I'm just talking about the legislative branch of Illinois. Similar to the federal government, we have a Senate with 59 members from 59 legislative districts, and we have a House of Representatives from 118 representative districts. And so the way that kind of shakes out is that each legislative district, I like to call them Senate districts just to keep them straight in my brain, each legislative district is split into 2 representative districts. And so that's how we get the 59 senators and the 118 representatives. Every district has to be roughly equal in population, just like when you draw district lines federally. They have to have roughly the same amount of people in them. The term of office for a senator is either 2 years or 4 years. There are some senators that serve for 2. There are some senators that serve for 4. And there's provisions in the document that lays out how you decide which senators serve for longer. The terms for representatives are 2 years across the board. All representatives serve for 2 years. To serve in the legislature, what are the qualifications? Well, 1, you have to be a U.S. citizen. Doesn't specify for how long. You have to be at least 21 years of age, and you have to have lived in the district you're running from for at least 2 years. And anytime there is a vacancy, in the Illinois Senate or the Illinois House, the governor will appoint someone to fill that opening. So if someone is impeached, if someone leaves office, if someone quits, if someone dies while in office, that vacancy is appointed by the governor. And then it also says that you cannot hold another public office while you are in the Illinois legislature. That is the only public office you're allowed to hold. Let's quickly talk about legislative redistricting. It's done every 10 years, so they do it along with the federal redistricting. One person is appointed to redistrict who isn't part of the General Assembly. So they try to sort of head off gerrymandering by bringing in a third party to help draw those district lines. The redistricting plan has to be approved by the Illinois Supreme Court as well. Electing senators and representatives. There is an election for Illinois General Assembly members on even numbered years. So they coincide with U.S. election years. How does the legislative branch work? Well, bills can start in either the House or the Senate. That's similar to how it works in the United States Congress. But in the General Assembly, everything works pretty much the same. If we were to go back and watch I'm Just a Bill, I'm Only a Bill, I'm sitting here on Capitol Hill, the whole process would be generally the same. It would have to go through the committee process. It would have to be presented to the entire House. They would vote on it. It would go across the hall. Same thing happens in the Senate. But once that bill passes both the House and the Senate, that's where things get a little bit differently. It has to be signed first by the Speaker of the House and the President of the Senate. So bills in Illinois actually require 3 signatures, whereas federal bills only require the president's. So once they pass both houses of the General Assembly, they have to be signed by the Speaker, they have to be signed by the President of the Senate, then they go to the governor's desk. That's where the governor can either sign it into law or he can veto it. This is different than the federal government because the governor has 60 days to act on a bill. All right, 10 days is how long a president has to act on it before it moves on from there. But in Illinois, governor has all of 60 days. Excuse me. So the president of the U.S. only has 2 ways to veto. He can either just veto it outright, or he can pocket veto it. But in Illinois, there are actually 3 different types. So that's a difference as well. And then the final thing is that the legislative branch has the power to impeach state-level government officials. And that is it for today. Our next video is going to talk about the executive and judicial branches. Everyone have a wonderful evening or day.